Sorry for the slight delay. Apparently my earrings were making this thing make sounds and I had technical difficulties, and so I've learned some new things since that might actually be something I might mention for this. But yeah, so hi, I'm Tiffany Jernigan. I am giving a talk on some tips and tricks for Kubernetes. Hopefully there's at least something here that you don't know yet. If you still, which seems to be less and less as we go on, use like Twitter or X, I have my handle there. I have my website, which has other talks and things I've done. I guess here's another slide that has stuff about me, but basically this talk was created with my friend Jerome Pettizzoni and me. We first did it at KCD in UK, and then now I'm sometimes doing it by myself. So if you're hiring for developer advocates right now, please let me know. If you need someone to teach you or your company more things about like Docker and Kubernetes, Jerome gives a bunch of different training things on that. The QR code at the bottom of this screen and pretty much every other screen there, theoretically, should still be linking to these slides. So yeah. All right, so who here, which hopefully has been everyone, has run Kubernetes locally? Okay, cool. I'm seeing who's actually listening or not. But yeah, basically there's a bunch of different options out there. Who here has not heard of one of the things on here so far? Okay, cool. So yeah, basically, I mean, maybe you use like Docker Desktop. Maybe if you have like a Mac like I do, maybe you're using OrbStack. Basically, there's a bunch of different options. It's especially useful when you are testing things, or say you are currently unemployed and you don't want to be paying money for anything to be able to use it. So who here knew that with Kind that you can actually create a multi-node cluster? Okay, so fewer people. Yeah, so I actually didn't know about that until somewhat recently. It's pretty useful if you want to do things like having like taints and tolerations, or maybe you just are, say you're just starting off with Kubernetes, which maybe is someone in this room, just like playing around with things like daemon sets and be able to see that you have your pod, you have your, say you have 4 nodes, for instance, and then you have whatever that pod is, and you have it, say you have Nginx, and you have that running on every single one of your nodes. Okay, so who has used, and actually, so I've been saying this wrong for the last, I don't know how long, but I was having a discussion with Abdul, who's speaking after me, about how you are supposed to say the first word there. So I was saying kubectl, he was saying kubectl, and apparently, according to the actual like 1.9 release, it's kubectl. But if I screw up and say it wrong, you can all yell at me later, or maybe you have a different way of saying it. I've heard kubectl, which we are both like, wait, what? And there's kubectl. Just there's so many different things. I was telling my phone last night to remind me of something to add to the slide deck, and it literally typed it as kubectl. So who knows? All right. So yeah, basically there is kubectl await. You can use it on a bunch of different resources. So for instance, you could use that on nodes. That is super useful if you want to have like some sort of like CI like testing scripts, and you want to make sure, well, you actually have your worker nodes up, because, well, you can't run anything if you don't have that on there. It's not so useful if you're using something like Kind, because until the cluster is fully up and has all of the nodes, you can't actually go and check for that. All right. So who here has heard of kubectl or kubeNS? Okay, so there's tools created by Amit, and you can go on GitHub and find them. So if I were to go to my terminal window here, we'll find out if it's large enough for people to read. Is the font pretty okay? All right, cool. So for this, it's pretty much a easier shortcut way of being able to see like what are all of the clusters that you have in whatever like kubeconfig or kubeconfig files that it knows about. So for instance, right now I have a bunch of different ones that I had started up when I was playing around with DigitalOcean. I have Docker Desktop, I have OrbStack, and I have the Kind cluster that I currently am using since I created it beforehand. You can also use kubeNS. So for kubeNS, basically it's the same idea, except for you get to switch between the different namespaces that you might have. So if I were to do like I use K because I am really lazy and I don't feel like typing everything out, so it's just an alias. But if I were to create a namespace, I could then go do Kubernetes, and I could have it do the completion there, or I could just type hello. So now basically as a result, instead of like doing kube control -n on hello for every single thing that I want to do for it, I'm now in that namespace, and everything I run will be in that namespace. Okay. So let's go back over here. Okay, so basically, as I was kind of like mentioning before, you can go and do wait on a bunch of different resources. This is where I was having some issues right beforehand. If you are trying to be, or at least when I was trying to be on the Alphabet Wi-Fi, it refused to let me pull any images. So I am now on the Google one. Google Guest, and we'll see what actually happens there. But basically, with Kind, there is a flag that you can use that can pull down an image onto every single one, like onto your nodes beforehand. If you are pulling down an image with a specific version, you'll have that on whatever node it pulled it down on already. But like, say if I'm using Nginx and I want it to be like the latest, it'll try going and fetching that. So if I go and just do a create deployment, and again, since I'm super lazy, I just do type deploy instead of deployment and things like that. Okay, so basically I could go do a wait on my deployment. And so you give it a condition, and then you can wait for it to be available. Since I already pulled it down onto the nodes, it's not taking the time to do that. So you can see that's met. If I did a kget deploy, we can see that it is up and ready. This is also useful for just like making sure that you actually have your deployments ready before maybe you need to do something else with that. And scrolling too far. Okay, so basically there's a bunch of different conditions that you can go and wait on. Depending on what kind of resource it is, there are different conditions. So like, say if you have a pod or you have like a daemon set, etc., the type of condition may not be the same. So to find at least some of the conditions that you might have, there's a command that you can go do that. Who here knew that you can do -o JSON path? Okay, just making sure people are still here. Okay, so if I go back over here and do -o for that, we can see that the options for deployment are to wait on whether it's available or progressing. So you can do that for a bunch of different things that are there. So if we go back over here, so you can also go and do that for a service. So you can either do a create on a service, or I could go and expose it. So if we go back over here, and then I can go wait for the endpoints. And so as of like, I believe like 128, instead of having to know exactly where, if you have like .spec, .something, like so on to find out like where IP is, that could be kind of annoying. Here you can just do .. and it'll actually find where that is. So like you can wait for your endpoints, and then like if I did a kget service and kget endpoints, or we can see that we have that there. So you can also do that again with like load balancers. For that one, you're not just waiting to see if the endpoints exist. You also are specifically waiting for the service, which will tell you if you have to wait basically for your external IP address to exist, because otherwise you can't go and give that to someone or have them be able to use it, and it means that your load balancer is not fully up and ready. So there's a few important details with kubectl wait. So there is a default timeout that is for 30 seconds. If you were like me trying to pull it and unable to actually like pull any images, it would end up timing out. You can change that to 0, where it just goes and checks once and then gives some sort of report status. You can give it a negative value, which is to wait for a week. If you have a reason why you might want to wait for a week, please let me know, because I still haven't had an example of why someone would want to do that yet. And then you can also wait for delete as well. Okay, who has heard of either CAP or like the Carvel tool suite? Okay, I think there was like one person there. All right, so it was originally created by VMware, and then it's now part of, I don't know which stage it currently is in, but is now part of the CNCF. So if we go here, so CAP. Okay, so if you're using kubectl, for instance, it'll basically tell you that your deployment is created. But if you go and look, it may not actually be there yet. It may, yes, you have gone and tried to create it, but maybe you don't actually have a deployment when you go and check, for instance, why you would need to go like wait on the condition. So with cap, there's a few things there. So one, it will go and like tell you, for instance, what kind of thing it's trying to do, what operation. So like here you can see that it's trying to create a deployment, it's trying to create a service from my YAML, and like what namespace. But then it also goes and tells you everything that it's creating and waits on all of those things to be created. And then also if you look here, you can see that there's this -a. So you can give it an application name. So if you're using kubectl and you do an apply later, say you did that with multiple files inside of the same namespace, and they're different applications for whatever reason, and later you're like, oh, hey, I don't know where this file is anymore, but I want to delete everything related to this one application. Unless you went and labeled everything yourself, it's not necessarily so simple to go and do that. Cap goes and actually labels everything that you are creating with that YAML, so later I can just go and be like, I could do a cap delete, and then you can see all the different things that it's going and trying to delete, and then I'm only deleting those things even if I have other things running in that namespace. And there's a bunch of other tools. There's like YTT for YAML templating, and there's just other things out there. There's cap controller, which like pays attention to when you put something and make changes in Git, like Git, for instance. So, yeah. OK. So now let's talk about turning a deployment off and on again. So some of you may have seen this show, or even just like heard of this meme, but like, have you tried turning it off and on again? It seems to still work a lot. I've had to actually do that with random things for giving talks thus far in this circuit that I've been doing. So there's a few ways to go about doing that. So who here has heard of kubectl rollout? OK, cool. So basically, if I do that over here, if we look at our pods, we can see that there's one going to, that's one that's running. That's the one that I already have had for a bit now, for 6 minutes, and then that's the one that's getting deleted, and then it's going and creating a new one. So if I do kgit po again, we can see that we just have that one that's been running for 17 seconds. So that sort of turns it on and off again, in a sense, but you don't have any control over one coming back up. So, and just to like see kind of like how that actually is working, basically what it's just doing is it's adding an annotation, which is going and making, since you made a change, it triggers an update. So if I were to do a git deployment, and we look here, we can see that this is today and like when that ended up happening. So if you actually want to turn a deployment off and on again for like, say, some sort of extended period of time, for instance, like if you say, I need to do this for whatever reason, for like an hour, et cetera, you can use kubectl scale. Who here has heard that? Who here knew that you can scale to 0? OK, so most everyone there. So if I were to go back over here, and we can see that right now it's 0. There's nothing actually going and running there. And then if I were to go and scale that back up, let's just scale it to 1. And then we can obviously see that you probably, if you scale to 0, you've scaled to something else at some point in time. So why though? And I don't know why my mouse is showing up here, but yeah, basically every time I see this slide that Jerome added here, I end up laughing. So even if I have a bad day, at least there's something to crack me up every time I see this. So yeah, there's a few different reasons why you might want to go about doing that. So some are that you may want to turn off things that are not in use. You may want to deal with auto-scaling to turn that back on. One of the challenges is like that auto-scaling relies on like their CPU memory utilization, and well, you don't have that utilization if you don't have any pods running. And for front ends, it's a little bit more complicated there. Who has heard of canines? OK, Cool. So most everyone, but if you haven't, if we go back over here, it's basically another way to be able to look at the different things that are running inside of your cluster in a slightly more visual way without going the full graphical route and having there's just a bunch of different things out there like headlamp, schooner, etc. So if I were to do a rollout again on my deployment, we can see, if you watch here, you can see that it's now, it was red when it wasn't having it be ready, and then you could see that was getting rid of one, and you can dig into here and see what is the pod and what is the image in there, and then looking at logs and different things like that. Okay, so back over here. So who here has created some sort of YAML manifest at some point in time? Because, well, if you've used Kubernetes and you haven't touched YAML, congratulations. Basically, there's different ways of going about doing that. So if you are studying for the CKA or CCAT, etc., the faster that you can do things, the better. You do actually get access to docs last I checked, but you don't have access to external websites or, well, ChatGPT, for instance. So then basically you need to figure out some way of doing that faster. So one of the options is to do dash o YAML, for instance, and dash o YAML and dash dry run and client. So if we go back over here, and I also like using YQ because I like colors and being able to see things a little bit better. But basically, you get the YAML for everything that you have, either that you set or that is something that specifically cares about for your resource, so my deployment. There are some plugins out there that you can use to get rid of anything that's just a default value, and that way you don't have everything if you're dumping this into a YAML or into a file. So that can be pretty helpful there. So I know that said slide 11, and I know that my talk says 11, but due to this thing called inflation, I have a bunch more stuff than that. So who here has heard of both kubectl API resources and kubectl explain? All right. So basically, this is also super useful for that. So if we do API resources, we can see all. It's kind of weird looking because I wanted to make sure the font is legible, but therefore this is kind of smushed and chaotic. But if you run this yourself, you can see all the different types of resources. So we can see that we have a deployment. We can see where it's located to, whether it's in apps v1, whether it's just in core, etc., which can be super helpful. And then if you do an explain, so if I were to do that on a deployment, you can see what the higher top level fields are. You can see that you have spec kind metadata. You could also go and do -- recursive and get literally every single field that you have for that specific resource, which is also super useful for this, at least for the CCAD, when it asks me to add something specific and it's well, where is that located? Okay, so there is kubectl patch. So with patch, basically, you can make, instead of doing a kubectl edit, which you can't do if you're using some sort of CI/CD and scripting, you can't go and just do an edit like that. You may want to go and specifically change something there. So for instance, I have this patch here. If we go and look at my deployment and just do -o YAML, we can see somewhere here that we have this container, and then we just have it as the image nginx. If I were to go and try to do my patch, so something you have to make sure that you're being careful about is the name is what you actually are trying to go and change. If we looked previously, it was just the image the name for the container was nginx. If we go and look again at this YAML now, what ended up actually this is why I like YQ. Then I can actually see the different colors. But we can see that there's actually 2 images being created because it's looking specifically for an image that was called smaller nginx, which didn't exist. So now that there's 2 of them, if we go back to our deployments, we can see that basically it ends up failing. What ends up happening here in general is that since there's 2 nginx images that are trying to be run inside of the same pod that are trying to access the same port, one is going to end up failing. You can go and patch to go and remove that. So if I go back over here, so then I can just go and remove that. So there's also things like being able to go and label columns. So on my kind cluster, this isn't something that I super care about because I don't have different architectures, I don't have different instance types, et cetera, but you can go and get different information if you end up doing it that way. Sometimes it's important to see like what controllers are like owning your pods. So like if I were to go back over here, we can see that we have this pod that is owned by a replica set since, well, if you're creating a deployment, it creates a replica set, which creates a pod. So especially if you might have like some sort of custom resource, et cetera, that can be pretty helpful for you to go and figure out who owns that or what owns that, I guess. Okay, so instead of going and doing like a kubectl edit or going and doing a patch where you, for instance, might accidentally add another container, there is kubectl set. Who's heard of that one before? Okay, so basically I can just go and like set my deployment. I can give it the name of my container, and then I can, the container, and then you can change the image doing it that way. You can do that with your service accounts, for instance. Also have to be careful because if that service account doesn't exist, and say if there's a flag that you can do it to be more broad instead of just on that one deployment, and then maybe you accidentally made everything fail. You can do that, resources, et cetera. Basically, there's just a bunch of different stuff, and you can use kubectl set env to see there as well. Okay, so then who has heard of kubectl auth? Okay, so if we go back over here, and it's a little hard to read. But basically, say you're giving someone specific access to, like, hey, I want this person to be able to just view everything inside of the cluster, or I want them to be able to create things or view things in a specific namespace. You should audit that and make sure that you actually gave the person the permissions that you think you gave them, because maybe you didn't actually. So like for me, for instance, right now, I have permissions. You can see the star. I can do everything that I want on this cluster. If I were to go and like, oops. If you do it as, you can also do that as someone else and be able to see what they can do. So for instance, as kube scheduler, I can't do everything that I want to with that. So that also can be a thing that you need to go and just check on. There's other plugins out there that you can also use that you can see more information on, like what roles and things that you gave people access to, instead of just specifically doing it with just using kubectl. And it is I know that there's supposed to be like 5 minutes of Q&A. I have just a couple more slides, but seeing the ominous flashing thing at me, I was just like, wait, what time is it? But yeah, so there's also, so a lot of people maybe have either used just like the watch tool or kubectl, or I said it wrong, kubectl, and then -w. If you actually, there's a way to see a little bit more information and such. So if I go to here, so right now we can see that I just have this one running. If I, let's get out of here. If I do a rollout, we can go and actually see what different types of events are happening. You can see that things are being added, things are being modified, and just like each step of what's happening. So that can be pretty useful as well. Okay, so who has heard of Gron? No. Okay, there's one hand. Okay, I was about to say nobody, but that is not a nobody. Okay, cool. So basically, if you are doing like -o JSON path on something, but you're like, what is the JSON path? Instead of having to do like a -o YAML and then be like, okay, I see it's .spec, et cetera, and just like trying to figure out where something is, you can use Gron, and it'll actually tell you. So if we go back over here, oops. We can see like all the different conditions, and then you can see like where that is specifically located, which can be pretty helpful. Okay, so who has heard of Nixtory? Also, not many people, so cool. So say you're doing a bunch of testing, instead of having to go and create like a Dockerfile and you have your base image, but then you're like, well, say I want to have kubectl, I want to have curl, I want to have JEQ, and then having to go and build a new image that has all those things in there, it can be kind of annoying. So there's this thing called Nixtory. You can go to nixtory.dev. But basically, it will just go and create. It's not for every single tool. There are some things that I can't find. But basically, for instance, if I ran this, it would give me an image that has where I can use the shell. I can use kubectl. I have curl, JQ. If I go over here again, if I just do, not that. So if I just try doing curl on example.com, you can see that I have an image that has all that in there, which I thought was pretty cool. And there's some caveats. Images are AMD 64 by default. You can actually use ARM 64, though. You just put that in the front. And currently, there isn't a multi-architectural image for that. But just another like super helpful thing. But yeah, as I mentioned, more than 11. This slide, I guess I should have put the QR code on the last slide because that would be really useful. So I guess I'll just go back. But if you want to look at all these different things, because that is a lot of stuff, there is a QR code. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
I know.
The pronunciation of kubectl.
Wait, were you at the beginning of the talk?
I just came here to correct it.
Okay, because I talked about you, and literally our conversation yesterday, and how I was saying it wrong, and you were saying it wrong too, and was looking at this at, I guess, didn't mention the fact that it was like 2 a.m. when checking the, yeah, not the documentation, but the release notes. There we go. For the 1.9, it's kube control. So don't listen to old videos I did of this, or maybe half of this talk. So yeah, thanks, Abdul. You're next.
Thank you very much. Round of applause, Tiffany.